Tonight, as we are learning more about ADD, ADHD, and autism, you may have noticed that the title for this little Learn More session is New Hope for ADD, ADHD, and Autism. I've been in this field for over 60 years. Um, I first heard of ADD when let me go back. I started teaching school in 1962. And at that particular time, we rarely even had a discipline problem. If someone had a problem with the subjects, I was teaching high school English. We just kept them after school, gave them a little extra help, and everything was fine. It was only probably by the 70s that we started hearing these terms: attention deficit, hyperactive. And we began realizing, yes, there are changes in the classroom. So at first it was one or two kids. Then it was like a whole row of kids. Then it was maybe half of the class. So I was in the midst of trying to, at this same particular time, I'd started researching how nutrition affects behavior in 1967. There wasn't computers. I had to try to go to the library, find things. There wasn't a lot of information, but we were beginning to link that if children did not eat correctly, they were not getting enough of the nutrients that was needed for their brains. And it was also the high sugar, the high carbs, all of these were being introduced to the school lunches. It did affect their behavior. By the early 70s, we were linking food additives, coloring, red dye, yellow dye, all of this to hyperactivity. And at the time, we were also getting a lot of information from sociologists, education psychology, and they were saying, well, it's parenting. Well, it is the community. Well, it's the government. Well, it's the church. But I thought it's got to be something wrong in their body. It's got to be something we're doing to cause this. And then autism was a whole different ballgame because we began having children that were where in the years and years before they may have been called retarded. This was a whole different thing. This was where you might have someone that you knew they were understanding, but they couldn't talk. So there was just a whole lot of confusion, and as I began to call it, pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. When I began to really research it and began to try to get to the point of at least some understanding, we had moved to Atlanta. And I was privileged to meet and begin collaborating with a research pediatrician. And one day he asked me, Miss Sheppard, what do you think about these new labels? He knew I was a school teacher. What do you think about these new labels, ADD, ADHD, and autism? You think we have more of those kids or better diagnostic tools? I said, Dr. Murray, we have more of them. And he said, what do you think's causing it? And I said, there's something in their body that's affecting their mind. I just don't know what it is. And he turned around. He was actually looking in my little boy's ears while he had been talking. He turned around and he said, that's what I think. Will you help me? And I said, what can I do? And he said, you have students. He said, I want to do metabolic studies on them. I want to check their blood for vitamin and mineral deficiencies. I want to check fatty acids. I want to check amino acids. Even back then, he was checking the gut. You hear a lot now about gut-brain connection, but way back in the early 80s, by this time, you didn't hear this terminology. So I said, okay. At that time, I was staying home with my children. I was also tutoring 60 elementary school kids. I was tutoring them because I was quite near a school, and they were having problems with these kids with learning. They couldn't learn, they couldn't behave. And so they had asked me, the school had asked me, would I tutor them in reading? So 60 came to my house every week on different days, and I would sit with them and try to identify what's wrong with this child. Why can't this child read? A lot of them simply needed to be taught. A lot of them had started school way too early. And so I taught them to read, and that's, kiss them goodbye. Others, however, I took to Dr. Murray, and he would do the metabolic test. And we found out that every one of these kids were deficient in zinc. And he said, Mrs. Sheppard, no one in America should be deficient in zinc. But then he began to explain that if they were deficient in zinc, that meant their copper was too high. So I was learning every time I went, when you heard the expression of getting a drink from a water hydrant, it was that way with Dr. Murray. It was so brilliant. And I was taking notes and trying to learn as fast as I possibly can. After his death, he died from melanoma. Stephanie, you'll be interested that he paid for his medical school by serving as a physician on a Navajo reservation. And it was actually during this time he had contracted the melanoma, but he had lived many years, longer than anyone had lived in America at the time, but eventually we lost him. I continued my research, though, and began working with some more multifunctional medical doctors. Always, what's wrong with these kids? What's wrong with these kids? Well, one of the things that Dr. Murray taught me was about free radicals. Now, a free radical is a little molecule. You remember molecules from your biology classes, and they have the little spinning electrons in your body. If that molecule gains an electron, it becomes unstable. It will not obey its original design in the body. Instead, it penetrates another molecule trying to take its electrons or get rid of an electron, starting a chain reaction. Wherever that chain reaction occurs, you will have the breakdown of that organ. It's not usually very fast. It may take 20, 30 years. But in these particular children, by 1985, and by the way, by then scientists were calling this oxidative stress. When they were doing blood work on children, because a lot of different research physicians were studying this, when they would do a blood test on these kids, they found that they had very high free radicals, perhaps as high as a person with Parkinson's disease or multiple sclerosis. So the question was, how on earth do they have such high free radicals? A normal child will have a hardly measurable amount of oxidative stress. So when you look at a high level of free radicals, by this time they had discovered that the body makes something that is called antioxidant enzymes. 1969, it was discovered, Duke University, an enzyme in the body that its job is to eradicate these free radicals. Problem is, you decline 10% every decade in the antioxidants needed to eliminate the free radicals. But what did we see in the children? We saw that theirs were low. Their production of antioxidant enzymes were low. So if a child had ADD, ADHD, autism, or any childhood disease in a blood test, their production of antioxidant enzymes was lower, much lower than a normal child. So they began connecting the dots. Okay, free radicals are high, antioxidant enzyme production in these children is too low. A normal child will have a self-regulating amount. So then the search was on. So what do we do? What do we do? One of the enzymes that had been discovered, actually been discovered back in the late 1800s, but they're still understanding what it does in the body. It's an enzyme you may have heard of. It's called glutathione. Any of you heard of it? Glutathione. So they recognized that these children were very, very low in the production of glutathione. Now we know that a lot of things will slow down the production of glutathione. Geneticists are saying that over half of Americans are genetically predisposed to making too little glutathione. So these children were already, many of them, genetically predisposed. But if they were low in glutathione, what about putting glutathione in their body? So they developed glutathione capsules and pills, shots of glutathione, IVs of glutathione. I met with a doctor in Rochester, New York, that charged $8,000 for an IV of glutathione. So they knew there was a link. They knew that it would improve it. But the hardest thing, whether you were giving glutathione injections or IVs to a child with ADD, ADHD, or autism, or to a person with Parkinson's, or to someone with multiple sclerosis, it would not last. In a few hours, a few days, the effects were gone. So the big question was, how do we sustain glutathione in your body? Because we're not successful getting it in. Now, sometimes they're using patches now. They're using sprays and lozenges and everything, but it's all true. When you try to put glutathione in your body, and when we get through with this, you can look it up. You're going to find I'm telling you the truth. When you're trying to put it into the body will digest it. You don't want to take glutathione. You want to make more glutathione. So it's real important for you to remember that one of the newest things that is happening is that we have found a way to give the body what it needs to make more glutathione. In fact, clinical studies say that in vitro, it will increase the body's production of the body's own glutathione by 300%. So we are seeing miracles and changes that are occurring. Autistic children, and this is true with ADD and ADHD too, their language is developed on the left side of the brain. Same thing with you. Your language is on the left side, your speech is on the right side. So your glutathione production is necessary for this communication between the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere to meet. And as babies are learning to talk, they become more and more proficient. But if there is high inflammation, high oxidative stress in the brain, not enough superoxide dismutase, not enough glutathione, these signals are like this. And what you want to do is change what's wrong in the body so the body is making what it needs so that the signals are this. What do we see when that happens? Well, quite often we see a child that can speak. Now, that child's speech will be like what I call a Teletubby because they've not learned to talk. So then, let's say they're 13 and they haven't spoken. They're talking what we would consider a 18-month-old baby talk. So they have to be trained. Now, if those children have been on an iPad, it's almost impossible to teach them to talk. Why? The brain has developed that the way you communicate is on an iPad. So I beg mothers, do not put them on these iPads. Let's change what's wrong in the body to see if we can get them talking. With the free radicals, the body makes another enzyme, superoxide dismutase, that will eliminate 1 million free radicals every second, 24 hours a day. Same thing, you drop in production 10% every decade. But these children, again, in a blood test, will not be making enough of that enzyme either. Now, I had to switch computers at the last minute. I have 2 of those studies that I was going to bring up from the National Medical Library. Mary, I don't know if they would come up with you or not, but afterwards, guys, you can put in, just in your typical search, you can put in glutathione-autism. Doesn't even have to go to the medical library. And you're going to see studies. You're going to see products too. And Don't waste your money on them. They don't work. But you're going to see studies popping up that are saying these children are low in glutathione. If you put in superoxide dismutase dash autism, you're going to do the same thing. If you go to the National Medical Library, pubmed.gov, and you put in ASD, because now ADD, ADHD, and autism are all being grouped under ASD, you're going to find hundreds and hundreds of studies indicating that the causative factor is high oxidative stress. Dr. Martha Herbert, who is probably the leading scientist and physician in America in this field, said in 2011 that she's now convinced that the link to ADD, ADHD, and autism is glutathione. She says, in fact, I'm so convinced I'm going to get a glutathione t-shirt. I'm convinced of that as well. Now, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, I'm a researcher. But about the same time, I had been doing some research, and I walked in my den where my husband was sitting, and I said, honey, it's got to be glutathione. And he said, yes, darling, because the last thing he wanted was for me to explain to him all the scientific reasons why I thought the link to ADD, ADHD, and autism is glutathione. We have seen the body lose its ability to make glutathione to the extent that it needs it. You're hearing of more and more neurodegenerative diseases. Parkinson's is epidemic. Why can't we make it anymore? Well, you have to get the raw materials for your body to make glutathione from fruits and vegetables. It takes 8 oranges now to equal 1 orange from 1954. The fruits and vegetables are not nutritionally dense enough that when you eat them, that you can actually use that to make the glutathione you need. Plus, most of these children are extremely picky eaters. They live on chicken nuggets and French fries. Getting anything down them is difficult. But in my 60 years, I am getting letters from people, I'm getting emails, especially from parents whose children have had ADD, ADHD, and they're like, it's like he doesn't have it anymore. Now, the other thing I was going to show you tonight, and again, Mary, I don't know whether you can bring it up or not, but you all can do it yourself. You can go on YouTube. You can look up brain mapping by Dr. Jeff Fanning.
I'll send a link.
He is a neuroscientist. Yeah, you can put it in the chat box, maybe.
Yep.
He is a neuroscientist. He shows where he has, after having given a 15-year-old with ADD, I think he'd given him 18 neurotherapy treatments, his brain was still inflamed. He then shows what happens when he gives him 3 natural nutraceuticals. In 12 days, the young man's brain normalizes. So one of the questions that people ask me immediately is, why don't we know about this? You don't know about it because, one, you've not seen it on television. Most people in America learn from television. Some of it has been on TV, but you probably wouldn't have caught some of it. And the other thing is because the scientists at the University of Colorado that developed this refused to sell it to the pharmaceutical companies at any price. They wanted to be able to have something non-prescription. Now, they didn't develop it for ADD, ADHD, and autism. They developed some nutraceuticals to drop oxidative stress. I was invited to hear about it because of my work with ADD, ADHD, and autism. And for me, it was an answer to a long-term prayer. God, what do we do with these kids? How do we help these kids? So I could teach science for hours, but we're going to stop and ask questions. Mary, you want to turn off the video so we can be free to ask sessions. Yes.